This morning we're starting a new series, and it's going to lead us right up to. That's so close to me for some reason. It just grabbed me. I don't know what the deal is. So this series is going to take us right up to Christmas, and as we know, Christmas is the celebration of like one of the most profound mysteries, right? Of God becoming one of us, the incarnation. And so for the next 5 weeks, I want us to think about like why. Why did Jesus need to come to earth? Like, why couldn't God just accomplish what he wanted to accomplish without Jesus coming? Why couldn't God have forgiven and restored and redeemed? Why couldn't God have done all of it without Jesus coming? And I don't know if you've ever thought about this, if you've ever wondered, if God wants to forgive people, why doesn't he just forgive people? Right? Why the manger and why the hard life of living as a misunderstood peasant carpenter? Well, why a grisly death on a cross? Like, if God wants to forgive, then why not just forgive? Like, couldn't God just fix things? Couldn't he redeem and restore and liberate from afar? And so why is Jesus so central to the whole plan of God? Why in the world did he come? Like, why in the world? So that's what this is about. And this morning, I want to kick this whole thing off with just an interesting observation. Because Jesus showed up on the pages of history, right? The reason the whole world knows about him is because he was a religious leader. But if you read the historical accounts of his life, where we're getting our information from, okay, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus didn't primarily gravitate toward the religious people, did he? I mean, one way to think about this or to say this is that people who were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus. And he liked them back. In fact, it was often the people that were most uncomfortable with religion. Like the people that felt alienated by the temple system. The people that felt least at home inside of a synagogue. It was the people who felt most uncomfortable participating in all of the religious stuff that were drawn to Jesus the most. And the challenge for those of us that follow Jesus is this, like the church is his body now, right? What was true of Jesus should be true of us. In other words, people that are nothing like Jesus should be drawn to us. Like whether they agree with all of our stuff, whether they agree with all of our beliefs, people should just be drawn to us. And now in Jesus, the non-religious, they found freedom, and they found love, and they found liberation, and they felt valued. Because there had never, ever, ever been a religious leader like Jesus. And in the last year or so, we've talked about this a lot, right? For those of you that have been around, we've talked about this a lot. Jesus came to begin something brand new. And yet, there's always this force, this gravitational pull, sucking us back into the old. Like instead of a new life with God, instead of freedom and grace and joy, historically, Christians have consistently been drawn back into the old temple system. Back into religion, back into rules, back into good people and bad people, acceptable people and unacceptable people. And today, I want us to see one of the most revolutionary things about Jesus. And it's that Jesus saw people differently. You notice that? He saw people differently. He labeled people differently. And the way that he did this was so polarizing that it was infuriating to some and it was liberating to others. Now here's what I mean by labels. We all use labels to describe certain categories of people, right? We categorize. We just talk about whatever, these kinds of people, blank people. Like those are the rich people. Oh yeah, they're the rich people. Okay, or those are the educated people. Okay, those are the sophisticated people. Those are the stuck-up people. Or how about this one? Those are just not my people. Right? Do you have people? That was weak. Let me answer that for you. Yes, you do. You have people. Okay, we all do. Because we show up at some social setting, some gathering somewhere, and we look around, we size up the scene, and sometimes we're like, these are not my people. Right? Or sometimes we're like, oh, wow, these are totally my people. Right? We have all kinds of labels for people. There's good people. There's bad people. There's smart people. There's dumb people. There's nice people. There's mean people. There's alternative people, trendy people, cool people, Republicans, Democrats, libertarians. Okay, we label people. This is what we do. And that's not really going away, and that's not the point of the message this morning. But a unique thing about Jesus, and one of the eye-catching things for everybody, was that he used very different labels. He dismissed the common labels for people, and then he introduced his own. And this polarizing change was at the heart of so much of the controversy that surrounded him everywhere he went. For example, Luke tells us this. He says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus." And these were the common labels, right? The labels that everybody used in their culture. There were sinners. And everybody's like, yep, there's sinners. There were sinners. And then even worse, there were tax collectors. And the tax collectors were like so wicked, so evil, so vile, that they had like a category of their own. It would have been, it's like offensive to sinners to group the tax collectors in with them, right? And so this is, okay, Jesus is gathering to teach, right? He's going to get up and he's going to say something magical. And who is it that's all gathered in and pressing around him? It's these guys. And Luke goes on. He says, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, okay, a couple more categories. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered. That's such a great word. We should use that more often. They muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Okay, so watching from a distance were the religious elite, the Pharisees, the teachers of the law. More categories. And they see the tax collectors, and they see the sinners, and they mutter. They complain about the company that Jesus keeps. They're like, okay, Jesus, like we don't get this, because we just don't get it. You're a religious leader, right? But you never invite us, okay, hello, us up here on the hillside. You never invite us to hang out with you. You don't pay very much attention to us. You claim to be a religious leader. You claim to be from God. But look, it's the ungodly who like you. It's the ungodly who hang around you. Like, don't you get it, Jesus? We're the godly ones. We're the ones you should focus on. What are you doing, Jesus? Clearly you are a fraud. And Jesus knew that all the groups, okay, the tax collectors and sinners, and the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, were using the wrong labels. They all viewed people differently from their Father in heaven. They all thought in terms of good people, bad people, acceptable people, unacceptable people. And so Jesus looks at all of this and he thinks, okay, this is a mess. So I somehow need to teach both groups at the same time. I need to teach them how to view the world differently, how to view people differently. And so I'm going to teach both groups at the same time how our Heavenly Father sees people. So he tells them 3 parables, 3 stories, back to back to back, 2 about lost things and 1 about a disrespectful son. And these stories have become incredibly famous. So I am going to kind of cruise through these this morning because chances are many of you are very familiar with them. But the religious leaders are muttering about Jesus' affiliation with irreligious people. And Jesus doesn't set this up. He doesn't say, yeah, well, here's what God, he just launches into these stories. And he starts with an example that was familiar to everybody from everyday life. Okay, especially the men in the audience. He says, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and he loses one of them. Okay, now they saw this every day. Many of them had experienced this before. This is an everyday example for them. Now, it might not be for you. It isn't really for me. My shepherding experience is limited. But this was very, very real life for them, which is why he's using it as an example. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. He says, doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country in danger and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? Now, with this opening, everybody gets it and everybody agrees. It might be the first time that all of these groups of people have ever been in a setting and all agreed together on anything. But they're all listening to this and they're all like, okay, yep, that's what you do. Okay, you don't let a sheep wander off. You just don't. Sheep are incredibly valuable. If you lose one, you go find it. Jesus continues. And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. He says, then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me. I have found my lost sheep. Now, I think this last part is a little bit of a joke. People are like, Jesus made jokes? Yeah, I think he did. He's kind of exaggerating here. I don't think there were all that many found sheep parties. Okay? But he's pointing out a human response that we all have. Right? When you find something that's been lost, you feel good. In fact, you usually, and this is weird, you usually feel better than you did before you lost it. Right? It's so weird. But his point is simply this. When we lose something of value, we focus on what's lost to the neglect of what's not lost. And this is just our natural response. I mean, you think about this. Guys, think about this. If your fiance calls and says, oh, baby, I just lost my engagement ring. It probably wouldn't be all that helpful if she then said, but don't worry, I still have my cell phone. Right? When we lose something of value, it's not all that comforting to us that we have other stuff that isn't lost. Like, oh my gosh, I can't find my phone. And like, you don't look around and take comfort going, well, at least I have my car keys. That's just not how we do it. When you lose something of value, that is all you can think about, right? You're consumed with it. You don't start thinking about all the stuff that isn't lost. When Kate and Cam were really little, Jen and I were Christmas shopping. And I took the kids to play in the little kid area, kind of in the center of the mall. Cam was still in a stroller, so he was contained. But Kate was running all over everywhere. And those of you that are parents, you know how this is, right? It was exhausting. And so I decided I'm going to let my wife shop in peace. And I'm going to take these kids off to a designated kid area for a little while. And now this was the mall in Bellingham. And so the kids area was right smack in the middle of the mall, in between all of the, stores. And when I got there, I realized, I'm not the only one that has this idea. And this place was just jam-packed with kids and mostly dads. And it was nuts. And so I could give you a lot of excuses. I will not give you any excuses. I lost Kate. She just disappeared. I took my eye off of her for a second, and she was gone. Now, there was this little tiny opening in this gated off area so that people could get in and out. And I was hoping that what happened was that when I wasn't looking, she just ran out. Because the alternative was that she didn't just run out, right? Somebody grabbed her. And so you want to talk about panic. For 5 minutes, I freaked out. I have never been freaked out like that in my life. And I think some of you know what I'm talking about. You get this feeling and it starts down here somewhere and just comes up. And it's just like, oh my gosh, it was just sweeping over me. I was feeling like, man, I can't breathe. I'm dizzy. I'm out of body, but I got to communicate. I got to look. I got to do something here. And eventually, I was 5 or 8 minutes later, this nice young couple comes walking out of Sears, I think it was, way on the other end of the mall, a couple hundred yards away, and they're carrying Kate, and she's like, She didn't have the same experience I was having. But that was crazy. I mean, I will never forget that. That was like the scariest moment of my life. But you know what I didn't do in the moment where she was lost? I didn't call Jen. I didn't call Jen because I didn't have a cell phone. This was a long time ago, you guys. But if I had, I would not have called Jen and said, guess what, sweetheart? Kate is lost. I don't know if she ran off or she got abducted, but don't worry, Cam is still here with me in the stroller. It's okay, we still have one kid. You know, and the Holy Spirit whispered to me, and there's going to be this girl named Brooklyn, and it's going to be... See, like that kind of justification, that would not have gone over well. Why? Well, because Jen is so obsessive, right? I mean, she's out of control. No, because like when we lose something of great value, the fact that other stuff that we value isn't lost isn't helpful. And Jesus goes on, he says, I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Now, imagine the Pharisees' reaction to this. Like, this is unbelievable. This is mind-blowing. They're like, what are you saying, Jesus? What are you saying, Rabbi, that God is more interested than, like, in that guy right there who I wouldn't even have in my home, than me, who, like, follows God to the letter of the law? And before they can ask any questions, before they can raise any objections, Jesus confronts their labeling system one more time. He says, or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and she loses one. Now, scholars debate about exactly what it is that Jesus is referencing here. You know, what kind of gold coins would be an everyday example? He's using everyday examples, right? So this would be something that was very familiar to the audience in his day. And a common assumption that a lot of scholars have sort of landed on is that Jesus was referencing here coins for a dowry. You guys know what a dowry is? So parents would give their daughters like gold or silver coins as a dowry, and they would sew them into a headdress, okay? And so they would sew them in, and the girls would go around with the headdress in public. And it was kind of like bait. Right? Like, hey guys, you know, you choose me and you get the bling, you know. And that's how Jen landed me, actually. I know some of you have asked. So, and anyway, there are different ideas about what these coins represented, but what's clear is they are extremely valuable to this woman. In fact, so valuable that she is refusing to leave home with just 9. Like she wouldn't say, oh, well, I'll just take the 9 and I'll center them up and it'll be fine. She's like, no way, man. And so Jesus says, doesn't she light a lamp and sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it? And all the ladies in the audience, they're like, yeah, that's exactly what she does. And the men in the audience that had given dowries to their daughter, right? Their daughters, they're like, darn right, that's exactly what she does. And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin. And again, this seems to be a little bit of an exaggeration. You know, she might not throw a found my coin party. But again, he's going to the heart of the emotion. When you lose something of value, then when you find it, like, isn't it amazing? You're happier than if you didn't lose it in the first place. It's so weird. Okay, ladies. Sitting here right now, you have no emotion like about your purse, right? Until I mentioned it, you were not even thinking about it. I hope. But if you lose your purse and it's gone and then you find it, it's like, oh my goodness, I have found my purse. Right? Suddenly there's all this emotion that's attached to it. And because this is a powerful, powerful human reaction. And Jesus is wanting us to dive deep into this. He's surfacing something that is so obvious. When we lose something of great value, we go to great lengths to find it. In fact, we go into a frantic search. And so far, the people are like, okay, yeah, totally with you, Jesus. Sheep and coins and lost things and huge searches and this incredible joy of finding something that's lost. They're like, yeah, we get it. We're with you. But then Jesus launches into that famous story, the third story. A story about a father and a rebellious son. And many of you know this story. Let me summarize. A very wealthy man had 2 sons. And the younger son comes and says, you know, Dad, when you die, I'm going to get a big inheritance, right? And the dad's like, uh-huh. He says, well, it just feels like you're never going to die. It just feels like you're going to live forever. I mean, by the time you die, I'm going to be so old I won't even be able to do anything cool with my fortune. I'm like, I want the stuff now. I got big plans for my life, and so Dad, let's just pretend like you're dead. Now, Jesus is starting the story off in the audiences. They can't even believe it. Dad, let's just pretend you're dead, and I get my fortune. Go ahead and just give it to me now. And so, Dad, I mean, just imagine your child saying that to you. Hey, Dad, like, I appreciate all you've done for me. Been awesome. You know, like the car, and then like the college education, and then like all the opportunities, starting when I was a little kid, that you've provided for me and all that. That's been awesome. But like, I want the real stuff. I want the big stuff. I want my inheritance now. So how about this? How about you and Mom just liquidate everything? Like you sell the house and the estate, and you guys move into a little condo. And then you give me my inheritance right now. Because I don't want to have to sit around and like wait until you die. Let's just pretend you're dead now. I mean, what would that communicate to you? Well, the same thing that it communicated to the audience in Jesus' parable. Okay, this son was gone relationally long before he left home. I mean, this relationship was lifeless. Dad, you just won't die. So let's pretend you're dead. And that gives us context to understand the heart of this really unusual father. The father wanted to reconnect to his son so much that he chose the shortest route back. I mean, clearly the relationship is dead already. I mean, this conversation is coming at the end of all kinds of brokenness. Like he's felt the distance in his home. He's seen this developing and brewing with his son for a long time. This is a kid that he'll never take his earbuds out, right? Like he never makes eye contact or engages in any conversation at the dinner table. Like emotionally, his son, he's gone. But the father, he wants him back. Like not just physically, he wants him back relationally, he wants him back emotionally. So he chooses the shortest route back. He funds his departure. And what the audience realizes when Jesus said this is that the father loved his son more than he loved his own reputation. And for that culture, they summed up a father like that as a fool. Like, this is not how decent, self-respecting men let themselves be treated. Like, the father says, okay, all right, I get it. Let's pretend like I'm dead. I'll liquidate everything I need to liquidate, and you can have your inheritance right now. And you have to, like, picture the audience as they're listening to this story. like a stunned silence has kind of swept over the crowd because they were following Jesus on the sheep and the coin stuff. But because that was normal. This is not normal. Here's a dad who's willing to lose his son physically. He's willing to lose him to potentially win him. And many of you know how the story goes. Son takes his inheritance and he heads off to a distant country. And he gets a sweet little condo and buys a bunch of Ferraris, right? And he just lives it up. And time goes by, and time goes by, and time goes by. And you know the story because for some of you, like, this is your story. Or this is a story that you hope is playing out in the life of someone that you really love. Like your sister or your brother or your son or your daughter or a friend. But time goes by and eventually the son is overwhelmed because he blows his entire fortune. And the fast life slows down. And without money, he realizes, you know what? I don't really have any friends. And suddenly the son is overwhelmed by the realization that he is disconnected. Like eventually the son is overwhelmed as he realizes that he's lost. Suddenly he's missing home. And he's wondering if home is missing him. In his disconnection, he aches for home and he thinks, man, do I ever miss home? But I don't think home is missing me. So if I somehow went back, it couldn't be his family. Maybe my father would be willing to hire me as a servant. Because my father treats his servants way better than how I'm living here right now. And he thinks that's all I could possibly ask for. I've embarrassed him. I've humiliated him in the community. And in just a short season, I've managed to burn through all of the wealth that my father took a lifetime to recruit for me. So he's missing home. And he's wondering if home is missing him. And here's what's so powerful and brilliant about this story. See, in Jesus' audience sat people who knew that exact feeling. And I wonder if maybe you're here this morning and you say, well, I can relate to that. I mean, the people in his audience that day would say, man, okay. Look, I think I'm far from God. In fact, I know I am. And I would like to not be far from God, but I don't know if God misses me. Like, I don't know if there's a place for me. I don't know that I'll ever measure up like those guys up on the hill. Looking up at the Pharisees, it's just like, I know I'll never be as good as them. The reality is I don't even want to be as good as them. I think they're all hypocrites. So like, is there a version of good that's not like that? Because I know I'm disconnected from God. I know that I'm missing that. Okay, but is that missing me? And if you'd surveyed the people in Jesus' audience, if you'd asked the scribes and the Pharisees, they'd say, God doesn't miss them. He's disgusted by them. And if you were to ask them, they'd say, God's not missing us. He's disgusted by us. And then you know how the story goes. The son decides to take a shot, right? He decides to take a chance, and he goes for it. It says, so he got up and went to his father. And what happens next blows up all the labels and all of the categories in Jesus' audience, because they did not see people the way Jesus saw them. And this is so powerful. And maybe this is emotional for you. Maybe this next statement for some of you, this is why you're here today. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with, what was he filled with? And see, in This is the heart of all three stories. It all comes down to how God feels when he looks down the road and he sees us moving toward him. What is God filled with? What is God filled with? Is it disgust? Is it embarrassment? But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. And Jesus' audience cannot believe what they're hearing. What? They're like, what? Compassion? Have you lost your mind, Rabbi? Have you already forgotten what happened in your own story? Do we need to review? I mean, no father would feel compassion for a son who has done that. To which Jesus thought, you know what? You're exactly right. If the father in this story shares your labels for people, if the father in this story saw people the way you see people, if he saw the world the way you see the world, it says he was filled with compassion. He ran to his son and threw his arms around him. And again, people are like, wait, hold on, Jesus, come on now, time out. If the father is willing to run and to his son and throw his arms around him, why did he wait until now? Why didn't he do this earlier? When the son had his back and he was disappearing off in the distance and he was in that same place on the road, why didn't the father run to him and throw his arms around him then? Why would he ever let his son go in the first place? Why didn't he chase him down? Why didn't he chase him down the first time? Why didn't he just throw his arms around him and say, no, stay, please stay? And this is Jesus' whole point, and this affects all of us. Whether you're a Christian or you're a non-Christian or you're moving in one direction or the other direction, the whole point is the Father desired a relationship. The Father desired a connection, not just a GPS coordinate. Well, what the Father wanted more than anything else in the world was not just physical proximity to his Son. He wanted to be connected to his Son. And when he saw his son coming on his own, when he saw his son returning to him by his own will, he immediately turned and he ran in his direction. It says he ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. And this totally freaked out everyone in the audience. Because if you remember, this audience is Jewish. And if you remember the story, for those of you that know the story, when the son ran out of money, he went to work for a farmer taking care of what? Pigs. I mean, he could not have been a more disgusting character to this Jewish audience. And his father runs to him and he wraps his arms around him and he embraces his dirty son and he begins kissing him like pig filth and all. And then the audience is just totally confused. You know why? Because they didn't understand Jesus' labels. They could not understand how Jesus saw people. In their minds, it was real simple. There was clean and there was dirty. There was acceptable and unacceptable. There was respectful and disrespectful. And this son had failed on every account. And yet, Jesus didn't see people that way. He still doesn't see people that way. And you guys, if we are his body, we cannot see people that way. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." And on his long journey home, he had an awful lot of time to memorize this script. "Dad, I've been lost on purpose. Like this wasn't an accident. I've sinned. I did all of this on purpose." And the dad's like, "I know. I knew. But you're back on purpose, right? So let's move ahead." But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. The father's just like, okay, stop with the servant nonsense. Stop with the servant nonsense. Like, you are my son. You are every bit my son. And so bring the family robe and bring my family signet ring and throw it on him, because I want everyone in the community to know this is my son. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And here Jesus gives us his adjectives, his labels, his categories. This is how Jesus sees people. This is how Jesus sees every one of you. This is how Jesus sees me. And there's lots of different ways to describe you and to describe me. But if we elevate certain labels, this is how Jesus sees the world. For this son of mine was in the dead column, and now he's in the alive column. And we're like, well, but wait, Jesus, he never died. And the father would say, no, but don't you see? He was lost to me. Not lost like we couldn't find him. Like, we knew where he was. Okay, we knew where he was. I mean, his reputation, man, seemed like every other day one of my friends would come walking up and say, hey, you probably don't want to hear this, but have you heard that your son? And I'd have to go, yeah, I've heard. Okay, I know. I don't want to hear any more stories about my son. Everybody knew where he was. But he was dead and now he's alive. He was lost to me and now he's found to me. He was disconnected and now he's connected. And so that means we got to throw a party. And because this is how Jesus sees everybody. Everybody in the world. This is how he sees everybody in your neighborhood. It's how he sees everybody at your school. This is how he sees everybody at work. Like everybody on the basement floor, everybody all the way up on the fancy top floor. This is how he sees the custodian. This is how he sees the CEO. And so anybody you and I are ever eyeball to eyeball with, Jesus would say, hey, there's lots of ways I could describe them. And those descriptions might be accurate. But let me just tell you how I see the world. There are people who are connected to their Father in heaven, and there are people who are disconnected from their Father in heaven. And my primary concern is not the connected. My primary concern is the disconnected. I know where the connected are, and I'm grateful that we're connected. I'm so grateful. But the thing that has my attention, my priority, my passion, the thing that I cannot take my eyes off of, the thing I cannot take my focus off of, the thing that brought me to earth to begin with was to reconnect the disconnected to their Father in heaven. And so this gets to the heart of the question. Why in the world would Jesus spend so much time with irreligious people? And the reason Jesus spent so much time with disconnected people is because they were disconnected. The reason Jesus was drawn to people who were far from God is because they were far from God. And we're his body now. And what was true for him, like especially this part, it has to be true for us. And I think here's why we need to be reminded of this so often. It's because the gravitational pull for every community of believers is always, always, always toward the connected. The gravitational pull is always toward the 99 and not to the 1. And if we aren't careful, like all of us, including me, okay, especially me, and I've been wrestling with this for many months, can start to view the world with all the wrong labels. We see good people and bad people, right? There's good people and there's bad people. We see conservative people and liberal people. We see rich people and poor people. We see successful people, and then we see the down and out people. We see my people and not my people. And if we aren't careful, if we're not really careful and really mindful about this, we just become little reflections of our culture, using all of the same labels as our culture. And our Father is saying, wait, that's not how I see the world. I don't divide the world like that. And if you see people that way, then you will value them based on the label that you use. And pretty soon you will devalue all kinds of people for all kinds of reasons. But I don't see the world like that. I see the world as connected and disconnected. And while I love and I am so grateful for the connected, my eyes are always on the disconnected. So how tragic is it if we forget like this most basic thing about our world? Like, let me ask it this way. Think of it this way. Think of it from God's perspective. You ever lost something of real value and nobody was looking for it but you? It's horrible. Like, it's such a lonely feeling. And see, God is looking and he's searching and he's inviting us to join him. And this is the greatest, most important thing happening on planet Earth. And God is inviting us in our connection to him, because we are connected to him, to join him. Because every time another dead one comes alive, every time another lost one is found, there is a party of epic proportions. And our Father is inviting us to go on the search and to join in the party. Several weeks ago, many of you know, I had several Brookview people kind of share their stories on video. And between our church service and Ignite, we've showed you guys all but one of those. And so today I want to show you the last one that we have of a young woman. And she is now amazingly connected. In fact, she does the service of connecting all of us to our Father in worship real regularly. But not that long ago, she was completely disconnected. And I want us to close this morning by listening to her story. And those of you that know her, you know she's not a simple thinker. And so this, as you would expect, is not a simple explanation. But I want you to listen for the emotions. What it felt like for her to feel lost. And what it felt like when she came home. And as you know, this is Rebecca Ellersick, and she's responding in this video to two questions. How did you come to follow Jesus? And why do you keep following? And so here's what she had to say. Let's roll this.
There was a point in my life where I felt like I had everything that I was supposed to have. I had a lot of friends. I had a job. I had a house, great roommates. I felt like I had everything that a young adult was supposed to have. And yet at the same time, I was feeling so empty. I went through a really low point where I was struggling with anxiety and depression, and I just got to a point where I started asking, why is none of this helping me? Why I have a great life, and yet I feel so empty. I don't feel like I'm being filled with what I have currently. So I began looking into spirituality, religion, just different ways of thinking outside of outside of what I was already thinking, which was just about myself and, materialistic things. And so I started going to Buddhist temples. I was going to Catholic Mass. I was reading a lot. I was asking people a lot of questions. And I started trying to fill my life with spiritual things. Out of all the religions I had learned about at that point, I was most skeptical of Christianity. I had met a handful of people who just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. Christianity didn't seem like my cup of tea. And I kind of wrote it off until I met my friend Tony Ellersick, and he told me that it'd be really hypocritical of me to say that I was learning more and experimenting more with spirituality and not attend a Christian church. And so I took up his offer to go to Brookview, and I went a couple times, maybe like 3 or 4 times, and one of those mornings we were singing the worship songs after a sermon, and the song How He Loves began to play. And it was the first time I had actually really listened to the words. It's a really simple song. It was the first time I can remember actually feeling whole, like filled. It always sounds really cheesy to say out loud, but I was bawling my eyes out, like ugly crying status, and I just and it wasn't because I was depressed or anxious or angry for once. I felt like I had done a lot of crying in that context. This was a different kind of emotional experience that really I feel like is hard to explain. It was a very sacred moment for me. I just felt complete and whole. I actually didn't fully acknowledge Jesus in that moment. I had all those feelings that I couldn't explain, and that experience that was different than anything I had really felt, that whole feel. But I didn't necessarily admit that it was God in that moment. And it wasn't until, I want to say days later, I was at home and I was upset about something, depressed probably about something that now seems very minuscule, but in the moment was really upsetting to me. And I remember being in the middle of my living room, sitting on the floor, crying my eyes out, and closing my eyes, and just I just started talking to someone. And I wasn't even sure like, I believed, but I just started talking. And so it started feeling like there was someone there, kind of like a therapist just sitting, you know? Like I just felt like there was somebody sitting right in front of me, just listening to me talk. It was probably the first time I had ever felt calm and peace without one of my friends just telling me that it was going to be okay to be in a room by yourself, or what I thought was by myself, and then to just close my eyes and start talking about how I'm feeling was a big step for me. And I feel like God really utilized that in that moment, and I let it happen. And I think that it was my first time actually surrendering to something bigger than outside of myself, bigger than myself. I keep coming back to Jesus because I've realized that everything I've experienced in my journey to discover myself and why I'm here, the most full in love I've ever felt has always been when I've stopped trying to control my life, to control the lives of other people around me, and surrender to God. And it sounds so simple when I say it out loud, and it never is, but when I truly do surrender my heart to Him and my desires to Him, that feeling that He is intertwined with my desires is what keeps me coming back. And even if they are moments, they don't happen all the time like we want them to, but they are moments. They're everything. They're absolutely everything.
If I were to try to sum up the explanation of what she's talking about, I think she's talking about this feeling of being home. And if you have felt that, there's nothing else in this world like it. It's unexplainable to be at home with the Father. And I look at her story and I go, man, it was so multifaceted, and she kept turning toward Him, and He kept meeting her, and He kept meeting her, and He kept meeting her. And now she knows what it's like to be home, and she's learning more and more what that's like. And she's helping us experience it together as a family. And I just want to say that, man, maybe you're here today and you're disconnected. And some of you go, yeah, well, but I'm a Christian. I've been coming to church for a long time. Yeah, but you know you're disconnected. This isn't about, are you good or are you bad? Do you follow the rules or do you not follow the rules? The whole point is, are you connected? And I think the beauty is that every time we turn and we make that journey, God meets us. He sees us on the road and He comes running, right? And it's not a partial thing. It is a full embrace. It's throw the robe and the ring on and let's throw a party for you because this is what I want. And then we forget and we live our life. God says, remember what that was like. And so this morning, if you're in a spot, maybe you've never known what it's like to be home. Maybe you know, but you haven't been there in a long time. God is inviting you. He's saying, look to me. Look toward home. Because I want you to know, if you're missing home, man, home is missing you. Home is missing you. And when he sees you in the distance and he comes running, it's not going to be with judgment, embarrassment, anger. It's going to be with compassion, because that's who our God is. And nobody has understood that on earth except those that are really listening to Jesus and using his labels, understanding his labels. So I hope we do. And I hope we take those and we internalize them and we send and we go out with them. But this morning, if you've been in a spot where you haven't been home, man, God is inviting you. And I hope this morning that this is more than just singing songs, man. This is an opportunity to verbalize and vocalize, Father, I love you. And I'm grateful for your grace and your kindness to me. And I know that I am, and I need it every single day. I wander off every single day. We do. He's inviting you. So I pray that you would respond in this time.